me a picture of what you think schooling could become.
Schooling needs to begin with every child being known.
What I feel like happens in schools right now is we slowly but surely take human beings when they are their most curious and most questioning, and we dull that curiosity and that questioning over time.
Process and the purpose of school are out of alignment with what we know about students and what we know about the world. My heart fell in my chest when he said, "My classmates and I often look at what's happening in the world, and we feel like we are going to be the last generation."
I'm Zoe Weil, and welcome to Solutionary Voices, where we bring together guests on the forefront of building a more humane, just, and healthy world for all people, animals, and the environment. Today I'm speaking with Steve Cochrane, the Executive Director of the Institute for Humane Education. I first met Steve in 2016 when he was the superintendent of the Princeton Public School System, and he invited me to speak to teachers in his district. Little did I know then that 5 years later, he would take the helm of the organization that I co-founded, lead our work across 5 continents, and become one of my closest friends. When I first met Steve, he was so kind and welcoming, and honestly, he kind of seemed too good to be true. Like, I wasn't sure that if he was just a skilled educational politician or the real deal. Well, I discovered that he was indeed the real deal and then some. And I wasn't the only one who recognized this. He was named Superintendent of the Year of the Princeton Public Schools, an honor that followed decades of service to kids and to schools. Steve began his career as a dean at Princeton University, his alma mater, but he didn't stay long in the ivory tower. He left to become a 4th grade teacher, where he believed he could have a much bigger impact. He later became a school principal, then an assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction, and despite resisting the call for years, finally a superintendent. Steve retired in 2020, and by a stroke of good fortune, I reached out to him at what I think was just the right moment to pull him out of retirement so that he could do what I consider and what I hope he considers the culmination of his life's work, transforming K-12 education so that the next generation is joyfully and fully prepared for the essential roles they must embrace in our rapidly changing world where potential catastrophes loom alongside profound opportunities. And that's what we're here to talk about today. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you so much, Zoe. I so appreciate that warm welcome and the listing of the steps that led to my being where I am today. I thought that I had comfortably retired, and now I'm actually engaged in work that is more meaningful than anything I've ever done throughout my entire career. So I have you to thank for that, and I'm grateful to be here.
Thank you. So we always begin Solutionary Voices with a question for our guests, which is, what is the problem that you are trying to solve?
Well, I actually knew that was going to be a question. The one question I knew was coming. And in reflecting on my answer to that, I realized that for my entire life, Zoe, I've been focused on the same problem, which is how to make the world a better place, how to make it a more just and peaceful place for all life. When I was in elementary school, the Vietnam War was being played out on TV and in Time magazine pictures. I saw the horrors of war. When I got to high school, it was that post-Cold War era of détente. We were in SALT discussions with Russia, the strategic arms limitation talks. And so when I went off to college, when I went off to Princeton, it was with the intent of becoming Secretary of State and making the world a more peaceful place. And obviously, I did not take that particular path, but the problem has, fast forward 50 years, I'm still focused on advocating for an approach that will bring people together with multiple perspectives to the same table to solve these complex problems in a collaborative, innovative, long-lasting way, with the goal of making the world a better place. So it's been a lifetime pursuit of that particular problem.
I feel a little guilty that we have you here because I think you would have made a really great Secretary of State. So, so how did you come to believe that our educational system was the right place to focus your attention, like the right leverage point, if you will?
The right leverage point for me, certainly. And I have to say, it was not a straight path. I quickly abandoned the idea of becoming Secretary of State while I was at Princeton because I realized I just did not have the political wherewithal to manage that kind of career trajectory. And while I decided politics was not the right path for me, I turned then to my faith. And so in college, I thought that I would follow in my father's footsteps. He was an Episcopal priest, and I thought that I would go to seminary. And I made that decision while I was at college. But my father, he's a smart guy. He said, "Steve, don't go to seminary right away. Get your hands dirty in the world for a few years." So I secured myself a job as a management intern at an insurance company in Newark, New Jersey. And a week before I was to graduate, I learned of a position at Princeton University in the admissions office. They were looking for an admissions officer. So I applied for that. I was fortunate to be hired. And then I spent the next, several years of my life traveling around the country preaching the power and importance of a liberal arts education. And I loved the work and the setting so much that I thought, I can combine my passions. I can combine my commitment to God and my joy in working with university students, and I can become a college chaplain. So I headed off to the Harvard School of Education with that goal in mind. But as life has it, sort of this funny turn of events. I started at Harvard, and then I found a job on the other side of the Charles River as a residence director for Wheelock College in Boston. And Wheelock is one of the handful of schools in the country that focuses solely on preparing people to work with young children. And so I would come back from my classes in Cambridge, and I would talk to the mostly young women in the dorm who were working with, the youngest learners. And I just was so struck by their stories, became enamored with the mission of this college. And so when I graduated from Harvard, I didn't go to seminary. I went on to become Dean of Admissions for Wheelock, Assistant Dean of Admissions for Wheelock. And now I was traveling around the country preaching the power and importance of working with our youngest learners. Princeton called me back to be a dean. You mentioned that in your intro. And I loved that work, but I had this nagging feeling the whole time that I could make a bigger difference in the world if I were working at the beginning of the educational process instead of at the very end, and in the public sector rather than at the, one of the most elite private institutions in the world. And so I made the idealistic and very naive decision at the age of 30 to leave a deanship at Princeton and to start teaching 4th and 5th grade in a local public school. Probably the first time in my life I thought I was going to fail at something. But I was lifted up by colleagues who helped me become a better teacher. And then had the opportunity to go on and become a principal, as you said, an assistant superintendent and a superintendent. And I've never forgotten how challenging it is to be a great teacher. And at the same time, I had this amazing opportunity to see how great teaching could transform students and families and entire communities when it was done well. And so I truly believe that people who get into education do so primarily because they want to make the world a better place. And I see education as the one of the many vehicles for doing that. And so the last 40 years of my professional life has been focused on how can we transform education to give students the values, the compassion, the curiosity, the skill sets, the knowledge they need to be able to truly solve the problems that they care about in the world.
I love that. And I want to go a little deeper into your faith. I think it's so ironic that you were at Harvard in the School of Education while I was at Harvard in the Divinity School, but I'm not a believer and you are, and our paths could have crossed then, but maybe we were in the wrong schools at the time. So that's sort of an interesting question. But can you tell me about how your faith has sustained you in your long career working with kids and in working to try to create a better world, which is what led you to all this. And how, as we watch what's been unfolding in the world, the good and the bad, how your faith sustains and buoys and bolsters you, and if and when you ever have crises of faith, how that faith returns.
When I first made the decision to become an elementary principal, I think I was in my early 30s, and I was abandoning, I felt, this path towards the priesthood. And I went to my father, and I explained, like, okay, Dad, I really feel that I'm called to go in this different way, to work with children and families in a school setting. And he looked at me, and I will never forget what he said. He said, Stephen, never forget that the root word of administrator is minister, and that is what you are doing in your calling as a school principal, as a superintendent. And so I have tried to hold on to that as the foundation of my role and the way in which my faith infuses my work, that I am ministering to the students that I may be teaching, to the colleagues that I may be supporting. I certainly take that role seriously in my work as an executive director for the Institute for Humane Education. We have such amazing people, and my role is to support them in their work. I have relied on my faith even more in these current times of crisis. I think the Christianity and Christian love is it's an action. It's not an emotion. It's love of neighbor is the way in which we treat one another, and that phrase, that command, that manifestation of Christian love has become even more sharply in focus with what we are seeing in the world right now. Who is our neighbor? We know from the New Testament, from the way Jesus described the Good Samaritan, the neighbor isn't always the person who looks like us, who shares our religious values, who shares our economic status. The neighbor is often the most marginalized among us, and we are called to support and love all. So I look at what is happening in the world right now, whether it's our treatment of immigrants, whether it's the looking at countries that are considered less than America. And I feel that is not in line with my Christian faith. And I also feel it's very much in line with a vision that we have as an institute, that I've had as an educator, of trying to make the whole world a better place, of giving students the creativity, the compassion, the knowledge, the skills, that these see themselves as citizens of the world, with care for creation that has been given to them as curators. And so I do see the overlap there. Do I have crises of faith? Absolutely. Do I get angry at God sometimes for what's happening in the world? Do I have moments of doubt? Returning to my father's wisdom, he said, never worry about getting angry at God, as long as you're in dialogue with him. We get angry at the people we love. We have differences of opinion. We think that maybe they should do things differently. Just stay in communication. So I have tried. I've tried to maintain that relationship, and look at it as a relationship of love, even when I may be confused as to what's happening.
I love imagining you having an argument with God, and I just wonder if it happens all in your head or if you actually are sometimes talking out loud, and what that would look like from the outside.
Yeah, mostly in my head. I mean, there have been a few claps of thunder I've heard in the past, but yeah, mostly it's taking place in my head right now. So,
Steve, as you know, I did not grow up in a faith tradition. I'm Jewish by blood, but not by religion, because it was a secular household. But if I imagine somebody who is a rabbi or a pastor or a minister or a reverend, I could not imagine somebody better than you. And this is why. So there's this thing you do. And whenever I've come to you and I have something that I really need to talk about, and maybe it's something where I'm going to feel vulnerable or I need advice or counsel, and I indicate that I want to talk to you, you do this thing where you literally stop everything, you physically lean in, you look me in the eyes, and I have 100% of your presence. And I know I'm not the only person who you do that for, and I've watched you do it with others. And it's really beautiful, and it's generous, and it's genuine. And I wonder where you learned it. Like, maybe your father taught this to you, or maybe you realized how powerful it was as a teacher when you gave your students this level of attention. But was it something you actively cultivated? I mean, I'm not even sure how aware you are of the fact that you do this. And if it isn't something you actively cultivated and don't know where it comes from, I guess the question is, where did it come from?
I don't know. Zoe, I so appreciate that that observation. That's a gift to me, for sharing the way that you just did. I'm not always conscious that I'm doing it. I'm genuinely interested in what the person has to say and how I may be able to help. And sometimes just listening is enough. I sometimes think I'm a good listener. I was blessed with that. I think I sometimes listen better than I speak, and that's not a bad thing.
I think you're really talented at both, but we'll leave it at that. But I can imagine what that was like for your students, to really feel seen and heard by you. And so paint me a picture of what you think schooling could become, so that it really meets the needs of kids and their future and our collective future.
Well, building on what you just said, I would say that schooling needs to begin with every child being known, with with every child feeling safe and heard and celebrated. Both, their unique talents and the way they enter the world and receive information and their interests and passions. So that is a starting point. You know what, Zoe, I would invite you to sort of co-create this picture with me because I believe that co-creation is part of what makes for a joyful, purposeful school setting. And so I would ask you to join me in painting this picture of the ideal school using those two brushes, using the brush of joy and using the brush of purpose. And they work beautifully together to paint what I think we need school to be. And there are many schools out there that are that. But that if we start with the brush of joy, yes, it's every child known. It's relationships where, students feel connected to one another, where they feel connected to their teacher and to the staff in the school and to the parents and to the community, where they feel that they can take creative risks and that mistakes are celebrated because it's a way of learning. And I would say that the same brush of joy that provides that for students should provide it for the teachers. So often in schools, the teachers are planning in isolation, and they should be planning jointly together, coming together, feeling that they can take some creative risks, that they can even make mistakes, and that's a learning opportunity for them and for the school. So it's a school that has smiling kids, joyful kids. Deep learning is taking place because there's joy in that. There's joy in being stretched to learn something new. And at the same time, we want schools to be places where students see the relevance of what they're doing, how relevance to their own lives and their own interests and passions, what they love to do, what they want to learn, the questions they have, and then relevant to the world. That we are preparing them to enter the world. And so what is the purpose that we have for school, and how do we consider what the world needs those students to be? And that's where, if I'm painting with that brush of purpose, and I'm still waiting for you to jump in with yours, opportunities for students to seek answers to the questions that they have, and to do that in community, to do it with each other, with teachers, to explore ideas. I love, schools in this country, in Finland, that have, opportunities for students to come together and look at problems in an interdisciplinary way and just research them deeply and learn about them from members of the community. There are schools all over the world that are doing that. And we know from our own experience that when students have this opportunity to pursue something that they're interested in and to take the knowledge they gained and the skills they've learned and apply it in something meaningful for them, that their engagement just is, through the roof.
I had a couple images come to mind. I mean, I think about this question all the time. So thank you for the invitation to sort of jump in with my thoughts. And as you know, I'm working on the third edition of my book, The World Becomes What We Teach. So I'm thinking about this question every day. But what came to mind while you were talking were two images. The first was from last December, when we had a retreat of some of us at the Institute for Humane Education here at our headquarters in Surrey, Maine. And where, in December, it gets dark by 4 p.m. And we were planning to go till 5 p.m. in terms of the work we were doing. But I looked out the window and I could tell there was a good chance there was going to be a really stunning sunset. And to see the sunset really well, it's a 10-minute walk down to the ocean. And I just made the call that we were all going to go down to the ocean and watch the sunset. And it was so spectacular. So that image came to mind because I want to see that same level of spontaneity able to happen in schools. And you brought up students' questions. Like, if a student has a question, a really deep question, I would love to think that if it's a meaningful question for that student, it's probably a meaningful question for other students, and that things could shift and there could be spontaneity around whether it's running outside because there's some spectacular thing happening in the sky, or it's a deep question that we could stop and explore. And so that brings me to the second thing that popped into my mind, which was being in AP Bio when I was in high school. And this question popped into my head, which was, why don't we see any other hominids on Earth other than human beings? Other hominids coexisted over time. If evolution is such that, primates have been evolving, why are there no other hominid primates other than humans? So I articulated that question probably not that well. And my teacher just dismissed it. She scoffed at it. She said it was a silly question. And I don't think it's a silly question. To this day, I'm still curious about, where are the other hominids? Did we just destroy them all and none were ever able to evolve again? Anyway, it just struck me that we would really welcome the questions that students have. And instead, what I feel like happens in schools right now is we slowly but surely take human beings when they are their most curious and most questioning, and we dull that curiosity and that questioning over time. So if I'm imagining a school full of joy and purpose, it's going to have those questions.
Yeah. Well, so I'm going to build a little bit on what you just said. Two things. One is the spontaneity, or just planning for that, like bringing kids outside into nature on a regular basis. Sometimes just to play, sometimes with a real focus. Like, look at this tree, look at this cloud. Like, giving students more than just numbers and letters as learning tools, but giving them music and art and opportunities to be outside, and then to recognize the power of good questions. Like 90% of the questions most educators ask, are looking for a single answer. Did you do your homework? Do you have a pencil? Whatever. Very few are generative questions. And we need to in great schools, there's this focus on being able to ask good questions. It's modeled by the educators, and the students are taught how to do that. I wonder sometimes, with the advent of AI, there's so much around that that needs to be talked about. But one of the great things about AI is it's all about asking good questions. I mean, you can ask not so good questions, and then you're going to get uninteresting answers. But it does give you that opportunity to up your game in asking really good questions, and then building off of that. So maybe there's an opportunity, as we incorporate AI into the future of what good schooling needs to be. There's a actual focus on the quality of the questions that we are asking.
What do you think that the systems are that are at play that currently keep schooling from becoming the transformative, enlivening, joyful, and powerful lever for societal well-being that it can and must be?
Okay. And how much time do we have for this answer? Okay, so there
are a
ton of systems. I mean, you can do like standardized testing, mental health supports, teacher preparation, teacher pay, economic, racial disparities, school funding formulas, curricular fragmentation, political division. You can just go on. to me, the the biggest systems are the purpose, or the process and the purpose of school are out of alignment with what we know about students and what we know about the world. So the process and the purpose. The process is, still from the 19th century. It's still the factory model, the student as a widget, and they move through the assembly line of K1, 2, grade 3, 4, 5, all the way up. We have, the same knowledge and skills we're expecting each one to get. We want to make sure that standard. So we have the standardized tests that we administer to make sure that they're all getting the same thing. And we know that students aren't widgets. We know that they're coming with this, constellation of interests and skills and talents that each one is different, and they all learn in different ways and at different times. And so, good teachers work around that system that we've put in place for school. And some schools will have multi-age grading, where you stay with a teacher for, multiple years, and they get to know you, and they differentiate their instruction based on their knowledge of who you are and what you need. And so there's all kinds of things that we're trying to do to sort of subvert this factory model process for school. And so that's one system that's in place. And then the other is the purpose for school. It's often focused on getting kids into college and getting them into career. So, I know as a superintendent, I saw, students who are I'm picking this AP course, not because I really like it, but because it's going to look good on my transcript. I'm doing 3 hours of homework a night, not because I really love it, but because it's what I've got to do to get the good grade so that I can get into a good school, so I can get into a good graduate school, so I can get into a good job. And we're always pushing success, and the joy, it's always over the next horizon for students. It's never in the moment. And we also know that the college, the career, the things we're preparing students for, they're all changing. And the students know this. They know that with AI, with everything, by the time they graduate, the jobs are all going to be different. And they are painfully aware of the challenges that they're seeing in the world. They see the global conflict, the political division, the climate change, the destruction of ecosystems, and they're seeing the disconnect between what they're learning in school, what's happening in the world, and it's not a surprise that they are disengaged. We Challenge Success out of the Stanford School of Education has done some extensive research on this, but half of our high school students are doing school. They're going through the motion. They're just showing up, doing their homework, but they're not intellectually engaged, and they're certainly not emotionally engaged. Only 13% of the students that they've surveyed, thousands of students, only 13% are actually I love school. And that's not what we want for our students. So for me, it's the factory model from, ages a century ago, and it's the process and then the purpose of school. Those are the systems that would need to change.
Which means we have our work cut out for us. So how would you say that your work at the Institute for Humane Education addresses these challenges of transforming the educational systems, and in general, and specifically the two you mentioned? And how is your theory of change meeting the practicalities of leveraging this behemoth of a system?
So, all right, first of all, a confession. When you came to visit my school district in 2016 after writing your book, and I read your book, and I loved your book, and was happy to bring you, and we didn't radically shift what we were doing. I was new as a superintendent. We had a strategic plan we just written. It was around increasing equity and increasing the mental health of our students, the sense of the joy, right? And So I was like steering an aircraft carrier, and I just didn't feel like I could turn it to like, oh, now the purpose is going to be, preparing students to solve the problems that they care about in the world. And yet, I see now that had I done that, I would have fulfilled my strategic plan. That the students, there would have been equity. Students would have been pursuing topics that they were interested in, regardless of their backgrounds, that the mental health, the engagement, the agency that they would have felt in actually solving real world problems, the knowledge they would have gained and the skills they would have gained in applying their knowledge in a real world context, all of that would have been solved had I made the shift. And so, part of the work I'm doing now is penance, like for that miscalculation
Well said by a
on my
man of
part.
faith. Yes.
And it is working. So we are as an institute, we're working with schools to embrace the idea of equipping students with the skills they need to solve the problems they care about. And administrators and educators are seeing that there's deep learning and there's deep engagement. And so it is meeting what we want for our kids. So we're working now with schools in over 50 countries. We're working throughout the US. In the past year and a half, we worked with the Department of Education in Maine to train over 400 of their teachers to incorporate the solutionary framework, this process for solving problems, into their curricula. And we're seeing schools do it in all kinds of different ways, at all different grade levels, in different subjects. That's what our micro-credential course is about, is like meeting teachers where they are, working with them to say, how can you take this 4-phase framework of like identifying a problem you care about and investigating it deeply, looking at the root causes and innovating meaningful solutions, and then actually implementing some of those solutions. We're doing that all over the world with educators, and they're finding it engaging for them. Their teachers are saying, this has changed my teaching. I'm relaxing control a little bit, but I'm learning how to really engage students in different ways. And we're hearing from students that it's like they're transformed by having this opportunity. So it's happening slowly. We're seeing, the growth for us as a small organization has been pretty rapid. When we think about the 50 million students that we still need to impact, we have a long way to go. But I do feel that the solutionary framework is sort of problem-based learning taken to the next level. This phenomenon-based learning that Finland might be doing, PBL is something that many teachers are doing, but it's taking these big global issues that kids are overwhelmed by often, and then finding the local manifestation of it in their school or in their community, bringing in other people, having them talk about who's benefiting and who's harmed, and getting lots of perspectives, and then working with others to come up with solutions, and then thinking about those solutions in an ethical way. What solution, because sometimes we come up with solutions and they have unintended consequences. And so being able to really think, okay, how is this solution going to be helpful for all people, for the environment, for the animals in the environment? That has been really powerful to see that work happening.
Yeah. And, because we work together, like I know some of these stories as well. And hearing students say things like, we thought we would be the last generation, and now after doing this solutionary work, we have hope. And hearing that in a variety of different ways from kids who do this work, it's really powerful. So you talked about that 13% of kids who say, I love school. And I'm imagining that those kids who say that because they love many of their teachers, maybe even just one teacher who they have a lot, and they love that teacher. And I'm aware of how teaching is undervalued, it's underpaid. Teachers are overworked and overburdened. What do you think it will take for teachers to become honestly, the professionals with the most power and privilege to shape the future of any other professionals, and to step into that transformative responsibility and role that they have with their own joy, their own agency, so that many more students will say, I love school? Because when it comes down to it, it's the practices that you're talking about, this, having kids choose problems they care about solving and using the skills they're learning in school to solve them, and feeling that agency and the joy that comes with that. And it's being seen by their teachers the way I know every student of yours felt seen by you. How do we get there?
It's interesting to look at what's happening in other countries. I had mentioned Finland before, that consistently is at the top of the international heap when it comes to the PISA test. There's a lot that they're doing there. They have the phenomenon-based opportunities in every school. Not all the time, but there's opportunities in every school at every grade for students to pursue that. And to your point, teaching is one of the most valued professions in the country. It's one of the most difficult to get into, to be a teacher. It's highly paid, it's highly respected. There's a high level of responsibility that the teachers feel when they enter the classroom. Everyone's required to have a master's degree. There's not a lot of standardized testing and sort of holding teachers accountable, because I think the quote is from one of the leaders in Finland, that accountability is left once you take responsibility away. So how do we shift the way we look at the education and the role of teachers in this country? I think, we have an opportunity. We're currently looking to disband the Federal Department of Education. We're pushing education out to all 50 states. I hope some of those states step up and say, we have an opportunity to recreate learning in our environment, and to make it the kind of learning setting that we want. And I think it's really important that that all people, not just teachers and parents who are invested in the school system because they have students in it, or because they're working in it, but the schools belong to the entire community. And I would love for communities to come together and say, what do we want the portrait of our graduate to be? Back to the painting metaphor. What skills and values do we want those leaving our schools to bring to our community and into the world? And I believe that if we have those kinds of conversations, that it'll do a couple of things. One, it will unite people at a time when we're so divided, and where schools have become in the place where the culture wars are being fought very often, with book banning and everything else. But I think that parents across all political spectrums can just come together and say, we want some of the same things for our kids. This is what a well-rounded, healthy student should be bringing into the world. These are the skills and perspectives and values, knowledge. So that I would advocate for. That's one way of making this shift. We're seeing questions about, does democracy even work? At the federal level, we're feeling very disconnected from the workings of democracy, but it can at the local level. And maybe the shift needs to start there. I'd love to see the Federal Department of Education step up and step into the void and say, look, the purpose of school needs to shift. We need to be the best school system in the world, and this is the way we're going to go. But minus that, it may be people at the local level going to their school boards and just saying, like, what do we want for our students? Let's have that conversation as a community and make the change.
I'm so glad that you brought that up to all of us and anybody who's watching or listening right now, because this podcast is called Solutionary Voices. So there are people who will be listening to this for whom education is not their sphere of influence, but they can still do something, right? They're still citizens, and they can speak up because the education system, as you and I often talk about, is the root system underlying every other societal system. And so we are all stakeholders, whether or not we're teachers or administrators. And I hope lots of teachers and administrators listen to this and watch this. But we are all stakeholders. This is our collective future, which brings me to maybe closing our conversation with just a few more questions, but I'm going to combine two. One is what's at stake if we don't transform our educational system, and then it's sort of the corollary is if your work succeeds, what kind of future unfolds? You
mentioned earlier the story of Renato. Referenced that. So Renato is a high school student in Chile whose teacher was trained by us, and whose class was then involved in solutionary projects. And he did a presentation with some of his classmates earlier this year, talking about the experience. And I will say, like you, my heart fell in my chest when he said, my classmates and I often look at what's happening in the world, and we feel like we are going to be the last generation. So I had not been thinking that way until I heard this young man say those words out loud. But they're seeing ecosystem destruction and climate change and war and violence and poverty, and that's what they're feeling. So without that work, that's what happens. Without that work, we have students who have lost hope. And with the work, they have realistic hope because they have actually solved some of those problems on a local level. They may not have solved climate change, but they may have gone to their food service director and introduced some more plant-based foods into the the cafeteria menu options that are reducing greenhouse gases and making a difference. So we are giving students the agency and the optimism to be able to make a difference in the world. And your other question, what would that world look like? I would hope that it could happen in my lifetime. I don't know if it will. Education is the long game, but I would hope that for Renato and his generation, they would experience a world where there is no war, where energy is clean and abundant, where animals and ecosystems are thriving, where human beings are healthy, where creativity and innovation flourish. That is the world that I can imagine for Renato and his generation, if we do this work. Yeah, I know you and I are in our mid-60s, so, it's a big question if we can build that world in our lifetime, but people may not know that, you are a cyclist and ranked, award-winning. What do you say, when you I won some championships when I was much younger, and I'm still trying to compete on the national level, but in my age group.
Well, this is all to say that, I think that, you probably have 3 more decades. So let's hope and let's work together so that we can see that world too, because that would be nice. After all of these decades of you trying to make the world better, I would like you to see that vision unfold in your lifetime. And so I think we'll end with a final question, which is, if you were to write your epitaph, what would it be?
He listened deeply. He cared deeply. He made the world a better place.
Thank you so much, Steve.
Thank you, Zoe. This was such a joy.
And thank you to those who have been watching and listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Solutionary Voices. And I did not circle back to the question of AI, but we will cover AI in future episodes. We're going to have guests who are working in a variety of different arenas in their spheres of influence, bringing solutionary thinking. So together we can amplify those voices and we can share this information with others. So with that in mind, I hope you'll subscribe. I hope you'll share this episode with others who you think will benefit, and let's lift up solutionary voices and build a better future together. Thank you.